Hey friends, Jave Danielle here. Most people assume that red velvet is a Southern classic. I myself thought that red velvet was birthed by this older Black woman in the South who was feeding everybody at every repast and cookout. Turns out I was wrong. Or at least that's not true enough. Red velvet can't really be traced. There is no real origin story. There's no cookbook where it's been published many, many years ago. I mean, there is no lineage. There's no baker,
etc., etc.
But wait, come on back. Historians have pieced together enough of an outline for us to have something to discuss. Cue the intro. But Jave, what does velvet even mean? I'm glad you asked. During the Victorian era, there were three different types of cake. You had a sponge cake, you had a pound cake, and you had a velvet cake. The sponge cake was a cake made with butter, flour, sugar, eggs, and some sort of leavening ingredient like baking powder. So we're talking angel food cake, we're talking Genoese. Those were your sponge cakes. Then you had a pound cake. Pound cakes get their nomenclature from the ingredients. So there was a pound of flour, a pound of sugar, a pound of eggs, a pound of butter. Pound cakes were thickly dense. They were heavy, and they were made to feed the masses. Then we have the velvet cake. The velvet cake is all about the chemical reaction, baby. So velvet cakes were made by combining vinegar and baking soda, and eventually vinegar and buttermilk.
Wait, time out.
This is Oreo on the bottom, almost like a cheesecake crust. That's what this is. And then we have the red velvet cake on the top. And these are frozen, but they're still soft to the touch. I can still press down the velvet cake was a sharp departure from the heavier, dense cakes of the Victorian era, which is totally okay. And by the time we get to the end of the 19th century, we have where cooks are adding spoonfuls of cocoa into the red velvet batter. Well, once they do this, they see this crazy chemical reaction.
Kind of like this one, but with far less drama, you know?
Cocoa has this natural ingredient in it called anthocyanin. Anthocyanin will release red pigment whenever it comes into contact with vinegar or baking soda. So as they're adding in this cocoa and stirring up the batter, they're getting this reddish brown hue. They start to call that cake the mahogany cake. Let me set the scene for you. It's 1911 and the Victorian era has ended. There was a cookbook that published a recipe that called for two different types of cake. A devil's food cake, which is considered to be the cousin of a red velvet cake, and the mahogany cake. You remember the cake from the science experiment just a few minutes ago? Those two cakes combined create what's called a velvet cocoa cake. You guys, the suspense is mounting. But Jave, we thought that this cake was Southern. So did I. I was also wrong, but just a little bit more right than what you were. So here's the thing. In the 1920s, the cake got the most iconic Southern ingredient possible, and that is of buttermilk. Buttermilk helped to give this cake that tanginess that we all love. In other words, it kicked it up a notch. In the 1930s, the Waldorf Astoria, the famous one in New York, started serving the cake. Now, a lot of people give them credit for creating this cake, but we already know that this cake was created during the Victorian era. However, Waldorf Astoria, if me giving you the credit makes you give me a call, then you created the cake. You know, you created it.
All cakers know that sometimes your cakes just don't come out as you plan. So in this particular clip, this is my second design for the cake. I was just trying to salvage it at this point. This is my third time doing red velvet in a design that I absolutely hate. I think this is the curse of the red velvet for me because I talk so much junk about this cake. It never works out to plan. That's it.
Now, the South does play a role in the history of red velvet cake. There was a man by the name of John Adams, not John Adams, the president, John Adams, the president of a company that sold food dye and food extract. So he sold things like yellow dye and blue dye and also vanilla extract and almond extract. Him and his wife were vacationing in New York, and they happened to stumble upon the Waldorf Astoria, and they tried the famous red velvet cake. Well, he had an idea to actually push a few of his products into the cake. Now, at this particular time, this is World War II, everything was being rationed from cocoa powder to butter. Now, I told you before in the mini science lesson that cocoa powder has a particular ingredient in it that when mixed with vinegar and buttermilk or vinegar and baking powder, it releases this reddish brown hue. So with cocoa powder being rationed, people couldn't get that color in this red velvet cake. So he went home and came up with the recipe that would feature red dye, vanilla extract, and butter flavor.
Got him!
And that is how we get the iconic red velvet color. Now, the popularity of the cake skyrockets after John puts those ingredients into the cake. People love it. It's popular. It's brought everywhere across the country until about 1979. Now, there's a man by the name of James Beard, and if you are a foodie, you are well familiar with his name. He says that a red velvet cake is not only bland, it is also boring. So people kind of stopped making it. In 1989, there's a movie called Still Magnolias that features a red velvet armadillo cake.
Thanks, Weezy. That's like a good piece of ass.
It is at that point that the red velvet cake goes right back up in popularity, and you can find it everywhere. Till this day, if you walk into a bakery, you'll probably find a red velvet cupcake, a red velvet cake, or a red velvet cookie. Because people just love it. What? Though the history is a bit obscure, red velvet is actually a household name. And chances are you've tried it at some point in your life, or even made it. All right, my friends, we have traveled together on a tasty and historical journey. If you like this kind of content, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share with all of your loved ones. I love you, and I know you love me. Bye.